Student clicked on the wrong file from his flash drive during his presentation. What funny embarrassing things have you seen during a presentation? Back in high school speech class we were supposed to give a humorous speech, and I freaking killed it. Everyone was laughing uproariously, and I was ready to double down on a career in comedy, until I realized my jeans had been unzipped and displaying my tighty witties the whole dang time. I was not able to play it off as part of the act, unfortunately. Unless you started flipping tables and really dropped it at the end, I'd say the majority of people would be unable to take such a thing seriously and would have assumed it was part of the act nonetheless. Left my computer open in the library while finishing a presentation before class. Left it closed, with no password. I'm an idiot. Ike, to go to the bathroom. Came back to the library to pick up the computer. Walked into class. Plugged my computer in to present. Bikini pictures everywhere of a girl that sat in the first row. FML. I still don't know who did that. And leaving laptops out, with the exception of situations like that, is normal and safe where I go to school. We're all weird. My boss was doing a big presentation for our corporate executives on the East Coast. Halfway through our graphic designer logs onto IM asking how the presentation is going. His username is, of course, Ratfika. Had something similar happen, except the video was of the dude presenting, jerking off whilst wearing the undergarments of a lady. I knew the kid in high school, and he was the stereotypical anti-gay jock who, working on becoming a cop, was in the Marine Corps Reserve, because the Army, Navy, Air Force were filled with F this, F that, pick fights in community speech, where this transpired, with the liberals. Anywho, he clicks play on the video, and steps out of the room to let the 2-minute intro video play. The video starts off with him talking to an Eric, name change, about how he wants him inside him, emotionally and physically. Then it pans down to homeboy wearing ladies' garments. Then he proceeds to take out his, incredibly small, like no more than 4 inches of full mast, dong and start jerking. By this time the whole class is in this weird haze of WTF is happening, this is totally happening. Homeboy steps back in for some reason, sees the video and sprints over to the podium and rips the VGA connection out of the laptop, throws the laptop against the wall in one fluid motion, then sprints out of the room. The class just sat there in stunned silence. Then the professor said, well, that is going to be a tough act to follow, but different student, you're up. PS. I ran into the kid about 7 years after this happened. He is a totally different person. Came out, and is living with his partner of 5 years. Glad to see he is happy. I think the teacher should get some credit for being such a smooth operator. Last few days of chemistry class, and we had to give individual 10-minute presentations on something chemistry related. No doubt. In the lunch break between, my friends decide they want to smoke out in their car. I'd already finished my presentation, so I decide to join them. I go back to class, not knowing that one of those guys was up next. If it's not completely obvious that he's baked out of his mind, he makes it so by stopping mid-sentence every 2 minutes or so to stare longingly into the light of the projector, and then letting out a giggle after every observation. He aced the presentation. TLDR. Community college was awesome. Obviously his real report was about the chemical effects of pot on the brain. Back in high school Spanish class I had a friend named David. It was presentation day, and we had to give our presentation about any topic of your choice, as long as everything you said was in Spanish. It was David's turn to present, and he was the awkward kid in class that normally didn't say much, but he was crazy smart, and was in all the AP math and science classes. He starts his presentation off well, but then starts to fumble his words a bit. His face starts to get bright red, and now because he is more nervous and embarrassed he screws up even more. One of the super popular girls starts laughing at him mid-presentation, and he says back to her that she messed up a few words too, and that she doesn't have much room to talk. She gets that evil, mean, crazy B look on her face. You know the one, and she starts shouting at him kinda like, who the frick do you think you are? Do you know who I am? You aren't crap. You're nobody, and you're ugly, yada yada, more bitchy self-important girl bulls from high school. David just shrinks up a little more with each word, his face getting even more red. Then she says the worst thing to say to a kid ever. She is still shouting and says, frick you. I think you should just go kill yourself. Do the world a favor." At this point the entire class goes dead silent. Everyone knows that a few years ago David did try and commit suicide after one of his parents had died. He turned the oven on and climbed inside. Luckily his sister caught him before he died. But now here is this girl saying that he should go die. She was expelled from school later. But David had to go back to therapy for a few years. TLDR. Friend David with history of attempted suicide gets yelled at mid-presentation by popular bitchy girl that tells him to go kill himself as a favor to the world. For a final project in some sort of 21st century media class, one kid's assignment was to report on how tattoos, or body art, are used by people in the 2000s to express themselves, or some bulls. Anyways, the kid decides to do a demonstration of a tattoo application. So naturally, he shows up to the final presentation with a box of markers and a life-sized, naked blow-up doll, naturally. A guy in my class a few years ago was talking about the reconstruction, and when he reviewed to play a clip, it turned out to be hardcore shit to bestiality p. Cue laughter. I spent a minute trying to picture what softcore shit bestiality p would be, just drew a blank. My classmate went to type in her username and password, but the password began scrolling across the username area. Frickslet. My password is equally as fricked up. I hope this never happens to me. This story isn't flashy, but it stands out in my memory as a title of awkward presentation moments. In high school I was friends with this really sweet, but extremely uptight girl, Ziyang. She was normally the non-confrontational type, but she had a tendency toward emotional breakdowns. The presentation was for our religions class, and we'd been randomly assigned groups. She got stuck with a bunch cool kids who weren't known to be the best students in class. I don't know what really happened outside of class with their project, but it would seem that the other kids didn't help her with the presentation. Now, I have to add that presentation days were usually awesome. We were in an IB program with a relatively small group of students, so the atmosphere was usually sort of jokey and fun, because we all knew each other. But on this day, presentation days were about to be ruined, and I was about to have a new level of friendship etched in my emotional memory. The first few presentations were done, and Ziyang's group went to the front. Ziyang was holding this sad little poster board with cutout text and graphs and pictures glued to it, and all the other group members are sort of standing around with their hands in their pockets. They proceed to take turns reading sentences off the board. After they'd all read, Ziyang started talking. She got about 2 sentences into her portion, and then started crying, and saying she'd barely slept because her group members had ditched her with all the work. The room went that horrible quiet the way it does when people cry in class. The teacher gave her some words of encouragement to try to finish the presentation. A girl in the group standing behind Ziyang started to cry too. I think the other girl crying strengthened Ziyang's resolve a little, because she started the presentation again, except she only got a few more sentences in before she stopped, and started crying again about how everybody thinks she is a pushover and her parents work all the time so she has to look after her brother. At this point, I think our teacher just didn't even know how to end it. After a few more seconds of silence, Ziyang started the presentation again. It was madness. She would cry for a bit, then she would talk about Judaism or whatever, then she'd be crying again. I don't even remember how many times she started and stopped, but in my mind it feels like I spent years there. Ziyang and I are still friends to this day. She really did have it rough back then. Ziyang is indeed doing better these days, and as you might imagine, she has a pretty decent job. In junior year of high school, my friend had to do a paper for Spanish class. I forget what it was for, but he wrote it the night before in English, translated it on freetranslation.com, and handed it in the next day. He got it back about a week later with an F on it and he had to redo the paper. At first we all thought it was because of how poorly those websites translate full sentences and whatnot, but it turned out he translated it into French instead of Spanish. Professor had his wife, both late 60s, in a provocative pose as his desktop. Not nude, but seeing a 60-year-old woman in bed holding bedsheets over her privates was a bit creepy and weirdly arousing. TLDR. Everyone in class had the weirdest boner that day. Sad state of affairs if a 2-line post needs a TLDR. In middle school my computer teacher was probably the weirdest person I'd ever met. He was fat in the worst way possible and only wore cargo shorts, obviously to show off the thunder thighs, and spent most of his time talking about his horses or his Civil War reenactments. He was always Robert E. Lee. He's obviously very important, and was just generally awkward. One day while we were practicing typing, I went up to the stable, Riadus, his desk, to ask him a question, and I guess he didn't notice me coming, as when I got there, he was looking at, admittedly tasteful, gay pee. He quickly Control+Tabbed out of it, but not before my eyes were blinded by two flamboyant men in a bubble bath, one of which dressed as a rubber duck. I think he thought I didn't see, or we both just pretended it hadn't happened, and he was slightly nicer to me for the rest of the year. TLDR, weird teacher looks at classy gay pee in class. The other day my business ethics teacher was discussing basic logic concepts, using P and Q as satisfying conditions for one another. At some point she said that some condition satisfies the Q-ness, and then proceeded to say satisfies the P-ness. Then she paused, looked horrified, and said that was terrible. As a math professor who's made the same faux pas, I upvote you, sir, madam. Speech class my junior year of college. I can't really make fun of this girl because English was her second language, but wow, it was just awkward and really sad. So this Japanese girl is giving a speech about who knows what. I don't remember the topic. Anyway, part of the point of speech presentation class is to be able to give the speech with limited notes, a small noticode to remind you where you are going and what your main topics are. So this girl is giving her speech and all of a sudden just stops. It's like she just completely forgot what she was talking about, right in the middle of making a point. Drops her noticodes and just stares out at the class with a confused, dumbfounded look. At this point she gets really embarrassed and just starts stammering in broken English, I sorry, I need to go now, I so sorry, and just sprints towards the door at the back of the room. Don't see her again the rest of class, and I don't think she ever ended up giving that speech. First year of college and I had a public speaking class MWF at 8 AM. It's a Friday and we're doing speeches. We had an Indian woman in our class that was about 30 and couldn't speak English very well. Her and her new husband just moved from India at the start of the year, as he had got a job in a factory in the town over. We were doing informative speeches that had to have a visual aid, and her speech was on the Taj Mahal. So she is going through her speech and no one is really paying attention. She sets up the visual aid, and the teacher goes up to help her start her video she brought. She didn't know how to use electronics that well. The teacher sits back down in the back of the room, and she is going on about how she went here a few months back for her honeymoon. Then out of nowhere, the video turns into a full-on adult tape. This chick is blowing the guy, I assume her husband, before starting to take it from behind. The whole class, including the teacher, was at a loss for words. Everyone's mouths hung open as if we were acting out the video with her. After a minute this girl stands up, points at the screen, and says, "We're watching you, frick you know." The woman turns and sees what I assume to be the worst thing in her life at the time, and frantically tries to turn it off. She was just mashing buttons, not knowing how the heck the thing worked. After about 30 seconds of that, she just throws about 100 index cards into the air and takes off running out of the room. The teacher then let us out of class. When I asked him about it at the end of the year, he had almost been fired for it. You see, by the end of that day, the teacher had been called into the dean's office and was questioned about showing pee in his class. I guess he explained himself pretty well, and the dean thought it was funny. The girl did come to class the next Monday. In fact, she came to every single class the rest of the year. Teacher told me that he gave her a B out of sympathy. Sort of related. In my US history class in high school, our teacher needed a bit of a break from us. So he took us to a computer lab and allowed us to watch Braveheart. Not giving a crap about Braveheart, I opted to use the computers instead, as did several others. We had a large paper due. The prof was seated next to the printer in the room, and I noticed that he would pick up and glance over anything that got printed. So I went to the Wikipedia page on male lactation and printed that. It was good for a double take on his part. This was where I back in the late 1990s. I was in the workforce. I'm old, damn it. Now get off my lawn. already and working like a boss for the man. Anyway, we had a golf outing one day. We had about 100 or so customers out to visit our little factory. Later that evening drinks were had. So I did sales, engineering, and ran part of the plant. And the accountant decided to screw with the head sales guy, a friend of ours. We get into his office, turn on his computer and go online. Super fast dial-up modem. Well, we find a picture of a parrot perched on a dong, a rather long dong. But the pic was kinda narrow and didn't fit the screen. So we stretched it. So now we had a parrot perched on a 12 inches monster dong and set it to the guy's background. We turned off his computer, giggled like drunken retards, and left. So the next day the head sales guy goes into his office with one of our biggest customers. They're talking and she asks him about an order. So he boots up his computer. Needless to say, he was both angry and amused at the same time. He somehow managed to hide the screen long enough to pull up something else to cover the background so he could then start the program he needed. TLDR. Giant parrot perched on a 12 inches dong on my boss's screen while he met with our biggest client. I enjoy that. I know exactly the image you're referring to. I had a student who wanted to hook her laptop up to the projector to do her humanities presentation for me. When everything got booted up, her desktop wallpaper was tiled with the phrase "Eat my pee now." I told her I didn't think that would be appropriate as the rest of class was howling with laughter. She looked at me kind of confused and then saw the screen behind her. To state that she was mortified would be an understatement. And yes, I still made her give her presentation to the class. You are an evil, brilliant man, woman. My Italian teacher commonly has spelling mistakes in her slides for class. We were reading stories in English, then translating the verbs to the appropriate tense. She scrolls down and the title says "The Art of Fisting" instead of "The Art of Fishing." Laughs were had. I was in 6th grade in English class. The assignment was to write a 4-5 page short story using your imagination, woo, and read them in front of class afterwards. We worked on these for probably a month. I wrote a masterful epic about going to a planet where these boulder people ran around with tentacles and laser guns. I was a hero and was overthrowing their evilness. My mom, being the awesome single parent she was for a while, always had a computer at the house. Not the best, but it let us learn stuff on it. 5. 1/2 floppies anyone. This computer had WordPerfect on it. I wrote the entire thing in WordPerfect and DOS. Spell check was not as it used to be, but it got the job done. Now, it's my turn to read my short story in front of class. About 2 pages in, the teacher sitting in the back of the room starts snickering. I ignore it and continue. However, soon she leaves and comes back with another teacher, her best friend. They both start snickering and then just laughing. I realized then, WordPerfect auto-corrected tentacles to testicles, and I've been reading it that way the whole story. The students didn't get it, till the teacher pointed it out, while laughing, in tears. Great shame. TLDR. Boulder men chasing the hero holding ray blasters with their testicles. Hero cuts a testicle off. I was pretty cool about loaning my USB drive to my roommates, and normally they just held onto them until I needed it back. One day this roommate returns my thumb drive as I'm about to leave for work, and I just pocket it and drive away. Later that day, one of my super religious co-workers needs to copy some files for me, so I hand him the USB drive my friend returned to me. Up pops Windows Media Player with my friend's hardcore P stash, and my co-worker about bursts into flames. He stands up, tells me to get it off his computer, and walks straight over to my boss's office, who is also a religious fanatic. I spend the next hour having the most awkward conversation ever with my boss, and he agrees not to fire me, so long as I take part in a pornography addiction group that his church sponsors. TLDR. Found my roommate's awesome pea stash. Dude, I hope you quit that job. In one of my journalism classes, law maybe, the professor decides to go to a P website to prove a point. For what? I do not remember. Unfortunately, this particular site got her stuck in the endless pop-up loop that can sometimes happen. Of course, this was on the projector, so the class witnessed this train wreck unfold. It probably wouldn't have been so bad had she known how to deal with the pop-ups. While not embarrassing, I did witness a presentation on gay hookup sites last week. In a queer theory class, the guy spent like 15 minutes of his required 22 minutes creating an account on adam4adam.com. This site is funded with advertising, so during the account creation, explicit images of the biggest dongs on the planet were on screen pretty much the whole time. I love that class. Pro tip: if you have to have pee on your presentation laptop, put it in a TrueCrypt volume. Pro tip the second: log out of all IM programs before presenting so you don't get a Skype pop-up during a lecture saying, "Just thinking about your dong." The student copied the desktop shortcut onto his USB drive instead of the actual file. He spent 30 minutes with the professor trying to open it and they both couldn't figure it out. We got let out on a long break while they continued to not be able to figure it out. I was going to tell them, but I really wanted to see if one of them would eventually figure it out, which they didn't. The computer was broken. It said the word desktop in the error pop-up too. Also, we got to take a long break and not do anything that week, which was nice. Now I have another technique to use when I need to delay presenting something. In high school we all were assigned a specific part of Huckleberry to give an informative presentation. Well, this kid Daniel, who was always somewhat of an outcast, is giving his presentation, and when he gets to the subject of Jim, he calls him N Jim. Keep in mind this kid is not black. The teacher stops him immediately and gives him a stern lesson on the inappropriate use of the word, but makes him continue the presentation. Everyone is sitting in awkward silence just looking at the one black kid in the class trying to figure out how to feel about it. Last year, this weird, socially awkward kid that no one could figure out was doing a PowerPoint presentation in geography class. He has a video and clicks on one file in his flash drive. What the whole class saw was two 3D animated, furry hermaphrodites, fricking each other in the butt, crap and pee everywhere. The kid scrambled at lightning speed to stop it with no avail and actually threw the teacher's laptop across the room, and ran out crying. We never heard from him again. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.